Imagine we have a mean satisfaction score that has been done throughout the state of New Mexico for K through 12 education. Values from 0 to 10, with 0 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. Generally, the mean is 6.5 with a standard deviation of 0.5. You talk to a friend whose son goes to school in the southeast part of town and rates their experience as a 4.5. Another friend whose daughter goes to school in the northeast part of town rates it 7.5. So we have a hypothesis that the quadrant of the city we're in affects satisfaction rating. Let's use the 5 steps of hypothesis testing to test this hypothesis. Alright, so I'm back over here at Google Sheets. So let's work through the 5 steps of hypothesis testing in action and test our school satisfaction survey. So the first thing to do is to determine our hypotheses. So we're going to have the research hypothesis. Right? In this case, it could be that the quadrant of the city affects satisfaction ratings. Right? In this case, we're saying that in which quadrant you're in is going to have an effect on the satisfaction ratings. Is this a one-tail or two-tail hypothesis? Well, are we giving it a specific direction? In this case, we're not, right? We're just saying there's going to be an effect, but we don't know the direction it's going to be. On the other hand, we could have a research hypothesis, say that was one-tail. We're going to say that the northeast quadrant is a higher satisfaction, while the southeast is lower. In this case, notice we now have directional hypotheses because we're saying they're higher or lower. So the first one is two-tail, the second one is one-tail. In this case, we can use either one because I wasn't very clear. In a test or exam situation, I will make it clear in the description of the research which you should be picking. We can choose either one. Let's go with the one-tail for now. Right. We also need a null hypothesis, which says that the quadrant has no effect, or that the satisfaction ratings are the same as the general population, right, of all the surveys that were taken. Right, so we're going to be comparing our scores against the mean satisfaction rating across New Mexico. Right, so that is our comparison distribution. That's the null hypothesis. There's nothing different from our data from our friend in the southeast or northeast Heights. It's just what you would expect to get through random sampling alone. What are the characteristics of the null hypothesis distribution, the comparison distribution? Well, remember, I gave them to you. The mean is 6.5, the standard deviation is 0.5. Next, we have to determine our cutoff. We'll use 0.05, right, in this case. And so we know that our z-score for a one-tail hypothesis for the northeast quadrant, which we think increases, should be a positive 1.64. For the southeast quadrant, which we are hypothesizing decreases, it should be negative 1.64. If you had a different alpha, a different percentage than 5%, you'd have to look up in the table for what the z-scores would be, right? If it was two-tail, right, these would be the 1.96 plus or minus. But since we're doing two one-tail tests, it's 1.64 for one and negative 1.64 for the other. Next step is we have to calculate the z-score, right? And we know, right, that the z-score is going to be equal to our data minus the mean divided by the standard deviation, right? So in this case, let's do that. So our score for the first one was, for the southeast quadrant, was 4.5 minus 6.5 divided by a standard deviation of 0.5. That gets me negative 4.3, right? And then I can do the northeast quadrant, which is 7.5 minus 6.5 divided by 0.5. That gets me 2. All right. So now for the fifth step, I have to accept or reject the null hypothesis. So my calculated cutoff for the 4.5 in the southeast quadrant is many standard deviations, mini z-score is a way lower than my cutoff of 1.64, right? So for the southeast quadrant, I can reject the null hypothesis, right? It does not seem like it was caused by random sampling alone. Whereas for the northeast quadrant, it's at 2. That's a little bigger, but perhaps it's, close, but it did exceed it, right? And we can argue that, well, that's probably far enough to reject the null hypothesis, right? But maybe it's not quite as clear. It's not quite as strong, right? So in both cases, we can reject the null hypothesis, but definitely the Southeast Heights ones seems to be a lot stronger. And that's the 5 steps of hypothesis testing.